Okay, I think we might make a start. So, good afternoon, everyone. You're very welcome to our webinar today. So just a few little matters of housekeeping, or also probably not just to welcome people from Ireland who are joining, but also all our colleagues across the continent. And there's quite a few people who've signed up from various countries overseas. So you're all very welcome as well to join us today. So just a little bit of housekeeping. As you heard there, this will be recorded and made available if anyone wants to listen back to it later on or share it with some colleagues. That will be made available on the DPO.ie website. And the slides will also be made available on the website as well. So that's the background. You're all very welcome. We move on then. Maybe I'm Tom Gilligan. I'm on the committee of the Data Protection Association. So we're busy getting ready for our conference, but we also thought this was an important enough event or piece of work that's required for data protection officers that it required a little webinar just to talk people through it. So I'm pleasure in being joined today by Nollaig Keneally, who's the head of consulting at Privacy Engine. And Nollaig, if you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself, I'll hand over to you.
Hi, Tom. Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, Privacy Engine, I'm delighted to get involved with ADPO and SEDPO on this and provide some of the stuff that's come in. Some of our clients have received the questionnaire, so yeah, and we've engaged with them on. So we provide consultancy service and also provide a platform solution to help you administer and run your compliance program through risk management training, document management side and stuff as well. So yeah, happy to be involved, and hopefully, yeah, this will be of some benefit to the attendees today. Thanks, Tom.
Right. So maybe just to mention for you, if anyone has any questions, they can pop them into the Q&A section at the bottom there, and we'll answer as many as we go along. And similarly, there is time for Q&A at the end as well if anyone wants to ask a question. So if you can put it in Q&A, or if you want to raise a hand, we can let you. I'll let you join, and you can ask the question directly. Okay. So, Nollaig, what's the background then? How come this has all come about?
Yeah, so yes, first of all, moving into the background of the coordinated enforcement framework itself. So first of all, looking to understand the final question, look at the broader scope of it. So it's something that was first introduced in 2022, and the first CF conducted an action on the use of cloud-based services by the public sector, which is obviously something quite topical with the broad range of providers that are there and within that area. And in this year, 2023, on the 15th of March, they launched its second CF on the role of the DPO. Under their correspondence and a documentation in relation to this outlined that there's going to be 26 data protection authorities involved in that. And one of those is obviously the European Data Protection Supervisory Board, which are also involved from the European perspective. And as we discussed, Tom, I think that there's links to a lot of this, the documentation that these have produced and have made available are on the EDPB website there.
Yeah.
So looking at,
I'll put some of those in the chat so people can pick them up.
Perfect. So looking at yeah, what have the EDPB said in relation to this, but the purpose of this one is it was on the importance of the DPO. So what they've specifically stated themselves, as intermediaries between the data protection authorities, individuals and the business units of an organization, DPOs have an essential role in contributing to compliance with data protection law and promoting effective protection of data subject rights. I think most of us on the call today hopefully are aware of that, but that's an easier of capture, and that's obviously where to see the importance of the DPO sitting. We are an important piece of glue that holds all of the moving parts together. So then moving on to what they've actually kind of set as the purpose of this enforcement framework. So is to gauge whether DPOs have the position in their organizations required by GDPR Article 37 to 39 and the resources needed. And a lot of the presentation will rely heavily on those, and we'll reference those at various times, Article 37, 38 and 39, because then call it what exactly this state. And then participating DPAs will implement the CEF at national level in a number of ways. So they've set out that scope that, and we say again on the links that you put up, Tom, there is a broad range of difference between the questionnaires different purposes, different attachments, and different functionality of how they're going to implement it and enforce it. So it says, first of all, it can be a fact-finding exercise. Some DPS have set anonymous polls or anonymous questionnaires, some obviously aren't. Commencing with formal investigations, some have said that they will possibly commence formal investigations of the data to collect, and others have said they won't. And we've got specific feedback from the DPC here, which have been great actually in the process of presenting this, that they have engaged with us and provided follow-up and clarity on some questions. And then follow up on ongoing formal investigations. So again, these may be used down the line by certain supervisory authorities to follow up in formal investigations. So that's looking at from the broad European perspective, and then obviously here with ADPO looking at specific Irish implications. And again, we've engaged directly with the DPC here and sent them 14 questions for clarification, and just to provide a kind of broad summary of what has come back in them. So first of all was how many organizations requested this. 100 organizations requested. And then what was a sample of organizations selected? And they said it was public, not-for-profit, charity, financial, medical, technology, and SME. So it was a broad range of sectors that were requested to complete the questionnaire. And the next one is a kind of an important one. It comes out, as you see at the bottom under sections 1 to 10. So with whom does responsibility sit for completion? Because I know we had discussed the time, we're kind of like, what is that? Is the DPO answering this, or would DPO know that? Is that an organization? So they come back and stated that whilst the questionnaire was directed to the DPO in the first place, it is understood that the organization may be best placed to answer some of the questions for internal reasons. And our analysis and review of the questionnaire, we probably leave the questions 1 to 10 are organizational based, because that's about to support mechanisms for the DPO, the roles and responsibilities, the designation of it, how it was selected. Obviously, the DPO isn't, when the DPO selected and is in the role, they're obviously adhering to those, but the broader organizational role in determining what they were or where they were looking or what the roles and responsibilities were. So we kind of see that really 1 to 10 are more organizational questions, and then the subsequent questions are more maybe for the DPO to answer. And again, going back to the earlier point there, are there consequences, specifically the DPC here, are there consequences for non-response? And the DPC have informed us that there's no consequence for non-response. But obviously, data collection is a humorous topic anyway, but just try to lighten it a small bit. You can see obviously an anecdotal picture there, but yeah, I wouldn't be happy. Yeah, what you're submitting a paper, you can't see unsee what you've seen. So once it's there and it's going in, it may come back at some stage as part of something else. You've informed the DPO that they're acting in a non-compliant manner, or you've decided not to engage. So how will the DPC analyze replies? So aggregate them, anonymize them, and feed them to the European Data Protection Board. And then again, specifically coming from the DPC, while responses will be viewed internally, the DPC is not intending enforcement actions. But again, as you say, you can't unsee what you've seen. So then moving on to the actual questionnaire itself, into section 2, and section 2 is entitled on the questionnaire, designation, knowledge, and experience of the DPO. And the first point that springs to mind there, I know we've had a discussion, Tom, we've discussed with our clients as well. When you first look at the questionnaire, it seems relatively straightforward, multiple choice questionnaire. I'll put that on the long finger and maybe do it at some stage. But what we found is that you need to give it the time it deserves. It's a multiple choice questionnaire, but we see, broadly speaking, there's only one correct answer for most questions. And they specifically quote in a lot of the questions the regulation or the article that they're referring to. And there's only one answer that's aligned with the article that they've called out. So you need to give it time, you need to review it, there will be clarifying points, you need to get board level approval to answer certain ways, or to formalize things, or to implement policies, or to amend policies, so that you are answering it from a compliant position. And the next one there, as an organization with a compliant data protection program can answer them all correctly and can do it quite quickly. But if your organization can't, or if you're struggling with a specific question of what one of those should I answer, what one of those can I answer, that means that your overall program is deficient in some manner. Policy procedures, training, reporting, the role of the DPO, the positioning in it. So if there's some question that you're struggling with, it means that your program is deficient in some manner. And again, anecdotally, with a lot of our clients, what we do with this is what we get back, that the DPO is somewhat unsupported, unsure of the role, not getting buy-in from top level, not getting engagement from different departments and sectors, and the DPO is in the doing role, and everything is in their office, where it should be the reversal of that. So again, what we see this as an opportunity is like turning the crisis into an opportunity. The DPO should use this as an opportunity. The questionnaire reveals your gaps if you review it correctly. So start the process to address these gaps and answers the questions compliantly. So again, if it's identifying gaps, then push at the board level, push at the stakeholders, say, listen, I have to reply to DPC on this. At the minute, I'm deficient X, Y, and Z. I need to amend policies. I need to amend my role to answer this in a compliant manner. And obviously, you'll be hoping that the board at that stage, or your management, or the stakeholders are going to back and say, okay, we need to change it. We need to implement it now before the response goes back. So again, yeah, and then looking like do nothing and answer the question non-compliantly. So either the board backs you or stakeholders back you, and you amend it and answer it compliantly and correctly as you're doing it, or do nothing and then you're possibly answering a question from a non-compliant position. And so it's an opportunity, again, so the DPO should use it as an opportunity to get things over the line and get more buy-in and support. And what we see, yeah, as you said, like anecdotal evidence that the DPO is thrown into the deep end a bit. So it's sink or swim. But then to swim, like what must the organization provide you for you to answer this compliantly and fundamentally behind it to do your job correctly within your organization, not be frustrated. So you need clear roles and responsibilities and reporting. So job descriptions, and we've been into more detail in some of these about the oversight committee, data champion or data protection lead network. And these are broken down over broadly 2 areas. You've got vertical alignment, and question 5 calls this out, and Article 38 and 39 refer to it, that the DPO has to report to the highest level of management. So highest management level has overall responsibility for data protection and information governance. And the DPO sits within that vertical alignment. So decision makers lead by example and promote a proactive, positive culture of data protection and compliance. And as I said, anecdotal evidence with a lot of clients, a lot of organizations we're on webinars or seminars, this is what we get back from the DPO. How do I create that buy-in? How do I get people to listen to me? How do we implement X, Y, and Z? And an important part of that is your data protection oversight committee. And we look at a bit more detail in that in the next slide. So that's a vertical alignment, top down, and then you've got your horizontal alignment, where the DPO sits among other departments, HR, marketing, IT, legal, compliance. So there must be clear reporting lines and information flows between the relevant groups. And a way of achieving that is a data champion or a data protection network or lead or whatever you want to, and we'll talk about that in more detail after the vertical alignment. So first of all, looking at the vertical alignment. So like, what is it? And the term for this, or whatever you want to call it, is an oversight committee. So key staff required to attend the oversight group meeting. So you've got your HR, IT, compliance, legal, all of their leads or department heads sit on the committee. So there's combined responsibility, there's combined decision making, and they have to engage in the drafting, approval, sign off on policies and procedures. An appropriate senior staff member chairs the group again, and we look at question 14 and 15, that the role of the DPO is advised to monitor, report, but not specifically an independent decision maker. So yeah, the chair of the group has to sit outside of the DPO office. Clear terms of reference, and this will clarify that there's a clear terms of reference for the group and all your usual administration procedures. Group minutes, meeting minutes are recorded, and then the group has a work or action plan that is monitored regularly, and that is important. Obviously, there's certain day-to-day reactive stuff within the DPO office and within the organization, but you have, on a broader lens, you have to set your proactive, okay, this is our 6-month plan, this is our 12-month, this is our 18, these are the policies we're reviewing in the next 6 months, this is what we need to move to then in 12, this is where we're moving to from 12 to 18, have that broad long-term plan that you can get to the compliance situation. So that's a vertical alignment top down, and then we're looking at horizontal alignment across the organization. What we've called here is the data protection network or your data champion network or whatever name you wish to put on it. But this DP network has to be supported by management. So they have to, okay, this is now implemented. Departments have to provide that DP lead from their department. and that suitable staff have to be appointed from each department. It has to be someone that's capable of doing the job, that has a certain desire to do the job and understands the job. And key to that is that the staff are provided with the time and resources to complete it. So it can't be just lumped with an extra task that they're doing on top of everything else. So if you're having a monthly meeting or a monthly report, that they're given the time and the resources to prep that, to understand it. It's that you're providing them, and also the DPO's office is providing them with the training and policies to do that job, to clearly find this is your role, here's the training to make you aware and to inform you of the role, and here's the policy, or here's the report format I want you to complete. So you're giving them everything they need to do the job. So again, that goes on to the monthly report. So a monthly report must be developed, and that should cover the key touch points. Third parties are changing, and third parties changing the processes, training within their branch, incidents or breaches, and DPIA screening questionnaire. So all of the key changes within their department, that they are engaging with you in a proactive, timely manner. Because the key takeaway here is that the organization is responsible for the risk, whether they're aware of it or not. And that's in the European Data Protection Board guidance, where they go to discuss kind of human error or processing, not complying with processes or policies. If the processing is occurring within the organization is responsible for it. If you're not aware of it, that's down to your lack of policies and procedure and oversight. So the risk is always going to exist, whether you're aware of it or not. So then move on to actually the organizational line. So how can you also kind of helping achieve that is your reporting? And we've outlined there with the vertical and horizontal, that reporting must be two-way. It must be management down, and then it must be vertical and horizontal across all staff. The DPO must be independent and have no conflicts of interest. And the key case there from February of this year from the European Court of Justice that we'll discuss later is that XFAB case, where it specifically gives key takeaways on that no conflict of interest or no conflict of interest and the independent role of the DPO. Again, you must be brief and timely. You can't overwhelm people with information or facts or figures that they don't need. So concise, to the point, and how you need them to help you. And then those reports should be across training, risks, DP networks, DPIAs, policies and breaches. So there's the things that you should be keeping management or stakeholders informed of. And the DPO must report and raise concerns directly to management. Again, that's taken directly from GDPR itself, where it states that the DPO has to report to the highest level of management. So what are the takeaways as well, or how does that specifically impact onto the questionnaire itself? So as I said, we've grouped the kind of questions together, and we believe that questions 1 to 10 cover those topics that we've previously discussed. So if you have that vertical and horizontal alignment, if you do have reporting mechanisms in place, you should be in a position to answer the questionnaire relatively easily and straightforwardly. Questions 1 to 10 pick up on 2 of the articles, Article 37, which is the designation of the DPO, and Article 38. Article 37.5 is referenced in 3 of the questions, and what Article 37.5 states is the data protection officer shall be designated on the basis of professional qualities and, in particular, expert knowledge of data protection law and practices and the ability to fulfill the tasks referred to in Article 39. Now, some DPOs may be appointed into the role without those qualification expertise. Then it's up to the organisation to provide them for them. If they go into the appointment with a limited amount of those, it's up to the organisation to maintain and improve them. So that's an organisational responsibility, not a DPO responsibility. In Article 38.2, the controller and processor shall support the data protection officer in performing, and to kind of summarise this here, performing their tasks, giving them the resources to perform their tasks, giving them access to the required data and offices and people and staff that they need to have access to do the job, and also maintain their expert knowledge. So again, later on in section 3 to talk about budgets and training and stuff. So you have to assign a budget and give them backing that they can maintain their expert knowledge. So as you said, these are what we see as organizational questions, because it's a requirement on the organization to create a role, define its reporting procedures. These should be done prior to the DPO going in, but in a lot of cases they're not. So selection of the DPO and position, covering question 1 to 4, and expertise of the DPOs, covering question 5 to 10. And we look at this in a little more detail later on. It's telling that in most of those questions, they actually refer to specifically IT, HR, legal and compliance. So that would determine that they would see a certain level of expertise across those 4 departments that it would suit the selection of the DPO from. But again, when we look at the independence, that also has consequences. If they are double jobbing and within those, it's more difficult for them to have that level of independence if they remain within the section, and that's something that we'll look at later on in more detail.
I'm not sorry, just to jump in there. So a couple of questions that have come in. So I think, especially in relation to questions 1 to 10. So I think section 1, there's some particular questions, particularly on page 2, that need a bit of teasing out because they don't seem to apply to all organizations. Is that right? Have I understood that?
And that's what we wrote to the DPC in relation to that for that clarity. And that's there, and these slides will be available afterwards. But yeah, some of those questions are more geared towards the private sector, and then some are more geared towards the public sector. And it's quite when you talk about territorial scope and jurisdiction, that there does seem to be a bit of repetition there. But yeah, what the DPC came back and said, and I'm going to have a specific question that came back, but it said that certain ones relate to the public sector and certain relate to the private sector. But again, that's not clearly defined within the early questions, and it does kind of start to process off on a difficult footing. The subsequent questions like this on the actual your role and responsibilities are difficult enough, rather to have an ambiguity at the start, which the non-test questions that you're not even being tested on the early ones, and they're difficult to answer. So yeah, and again, the DPC have been very engaging with us on that, and again, the representative there that we spoke to said that they are available. So if organizations do have difficulty or clarification on the questions, we'd recommend to reach out, because obviously like what jurisdiction are you? A main entity, you're a secondary entity? Am I entering the data? I'm based in Ireland, but we have an entity in France or Spain? Am I including them in the questionnaire? It's so contextual driven, it can be difficult to clarify that. But again, reach out to DPC or whatever supervisory authority you're there with for that clarity.
Yeah, well, I suppose it does depend. As we know, in Ireland, we have to put the name of the organization you're sending the questionnaire in as part of the return. But we know from the EDPB website that some of them are anonymous. And I suppose if it's anonymous, you have a bit more scope. And that sort of leads me on to the second question, I think, is in relation to question 5, where it asks you, to in which department or group of personnel does the DPO belong to, and choose the option that best describes the position. And according, as you say there, according to 38.3, the only one you should take is the first one, highest management. But if I could maybe, what I've heard you say is, if the DPO is not currently reporting to the highest level of management, that this is an opportunity to correct that, or correct whatever practices have crept in since GDPR came in, and go back to reporting to the highest level of management. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess it's not too often that the DPO gets this opportunity not to waste it, because that's the anecdotal evidence you come in that, I'm writing reports, or I'm not listened to, I'm not at board level, I'm trying to change this, I can't, I don't know where to go. So it's and when we look later on in more in detail, question 14, 15, of what the DPO is expected to do under Article 38 and 39, and what they shouldn't do under Article 39 specifically. So like that, if you're not free, you've been listened to, this is your chance. Listen to, I've told you this, or I've been telling you this for the last year or 2 years or longer, that this needs to be implemented. To DPC or whatever supervisory authority you're under have specifically called this out and are now asking me, do I, in line with the regulation legislation, do I have that reporting mechanism to the highest level? So either amend the policies and implement it now, and I can say I do, or we have to then have a serious conversation of how am I going to answer it. And again, there's a slight difference here, and it follows on question 24, I think, about how many issues come across the desk of the DPO. And in previous seminars or wherever we've had with the DPC, there's 2 sides to this. You can have an organization that's great policies, but the policy sits on the shelf and all factual evidence and culture points to the opposite. Or you can have organizations that have the culture and factual evidence, but they don't have it formally captured in policy. You have to have both sides of that. You have to have the policy, but you also have to have the culture and factual evidence that supports this, and we have a policy and we implement it. So again, yeah, this is an opportunity for the DPO to get that over the line and secure that reporting channel to the highest level, which they're meant to have.
Yeah, so a couple of the questions come in, Nollaig, and I'll just deal with them briefly. So someone's asked, will we make the questionnaire available? The Irish one isn't confidential. We'll put that up on the website as part of the pack of documents. We do know that other countries have said it is confidential, but the Irish one is freely available. And the other question then was whether it's just in-house or outsourced DPOs have received it. So yeah, we know for sure in Ireland it's people of both persuasions, both in-house and outsourced. I've got it. So, but they have only selected 100, as Nollaig mentioned earlier. All right, Nollaig.
Yeah, I suppose the DPC don't know. The DPC are sending it out to their registered DPOs. So I suppose the DPC don't know whether that's, maybe if they look at the email or something, I suppose they're just going to their database of our registered DPOs. Because I think it was one of the questions we sent out, and they came back, no, we didn't include that. Was, did any organisation without a registered DPO get the questionnaire? And the DPC said no. I know, because there was certain discussions. Yeah, were organisations that the DPC or supervisory said like they should have a DPO. We send them the questionnaire to reinforce that they should have a DPO, but the DPC in Ireland didn't take that. So what they must be just working off, here's our database of DPOs, take a certain percentage across the various sections and industries and send it out. So moving on to section 3 then, so this is the tasks and the resources of DPO. So as we said, I think these are more specific questions to the DPO about how they're doing their job on a kind of day-to-day basis, and it's more for their replies. So first of all, looking at question 11, 12, 13 and 23 also in this, because it touches on the same articles. So these 4 questions are reference Article 38 and Article 39, and just for a brief summary of what that is. Article 38, it mentions section 1, 2, 3, 4 and 6. So 1 is that the DPO must be involved properly and in a timely manner across all issues. 2 says, and we've had it previously, that the DPO must be supported, provided the resources, provided the access and provided the ability to maintain their expertise. 3 is that DPO can't be punished, dismissed or penalised. Important part of 3 is the second part, which we've called out there previously, is that it must report directly to the highest level of management. 4 is that the data subject can contact the DPO, and obviously those contact details have to be in your privacy statements and on your website or any time when you're collecting the data. And then 6, the DPO may fulfill other tasks, but there can be no conflict of interest. And we'll look at that in a bit more detail, and that's what relates to question 23. Article 39, and then 39.1, and which goes into the roles and responsibilities of the DPO. And we've kind of summarized here that the DPO is meant to advise and inform, monitor assignment of responsibilities, training, awareness and audits, and advise on DPIAs. Now that's a very broad summary, but just for the purpose of today's one, that's the broad roles and responsibilities that we'll be discussing. So looking at specifically at question 11, so has the organization's manager clearly defined and given a written description of the DPO's tasks? And again, specifically reference Article 38, 1 and 6. So that's that they're involved in a timely manner across all issues, and that there's no conflict of interest. So again, that comes back to your data, so your broad data protection policy that touches all. I think in our draft supervisor or data protection policy, about 17 sections that need to be called out, like reports, audits, logs, DPIAs, subject rights, breaches. So you have to have that overarching data protection policy that covers all of the areas that you should cover. And again, your roles and responsibilities and where you're taking the DPO from and what their expertise is and how you're maintaining it. So again, that goes to that kind of vertical alignment piece that we discussed at the start. Question 12, have they been communicated to the organization? And then question 13, do they correspond to the actual tasks of the DPO? So looking at 12 first, have they been communicated to the organization? So how are you doing it? Like some organizations have a data protection policy, it's on a shelf or it's in a folder somewhere, but all entities who are handling personal data should have access to the required policy and procedures, whether that's your breach procedures and policy, your overarching data protection policy, your DPIA policy, because a DPO can't be across everything. It's not meant to be across everything. To identify where the risks are proactively through your horizontal alignment, stakeholders in different departments say, okay, we're looking at this. Look at the policy. I received the training to inform me that they can proactively engage with the DPO then, rather than leaving responsibility for the DPO to chase them about things that the DPO is not aware of. So that's like, going back to 38.1, are they involved properly? So how can you achieve that? That everybody receives the policy and everybody receives the training, and it's a bottom up, information is coming from the bottom up. It's not the DPO top down trying to chase stuff. And then question 13, and do they correspond to the actual task? So again, about that factual evidence and culture. You can have a policy and the culture is not to enforce it, or that there's no factual evidence that it is done. So what you do, and I know we actually had this discussion earlier, if there's an incident or a breach or something happens, I think off the top of my head, it's a later question. We look at how many incidents are logged internally or externally. So if somebody comes to you for advice at something and you give them that advice, that should be logged, or that should be amended in the policy. Because if you're giving up not off the cuff or ad hoc advice, it means the policy is now outdated. So all actions should be driven from the policy. So if something has happened and you need to give somebody advice, amend the policy and show them where it is now in the policy. Because if you give them ad hoc advice, that may happen with somebody else, or that may happen, the exact same thing may happen the following day with somebody else. So all of that advice should be captured in the relevant report or monthly report or training or policy. So it's one incident, the takeaways from that benefit the whole of the organization. So then looking at question 23, has the DPO additional tasks? And again, we look at 38.2 and 6. So 38.2 is that they have to be supported, given the resources, given the access, and being able to maintain their expertise. And 36 state they may fulfill other tasks, but can be no conflict of interest. And as we discussed previously, the selection of the departments for this question is quite telling, that it specifically references IT, legal, compliance, and HR, and then other departments. So they do see a certain overlap with the qualities of somebody within those, or expertise or training within those departments, that they can take over the DPO role. And specifically on the independence thing and no conflict of interest, we refer back to the European Court of Justice ruling on the 9th of February of this year, and the case was the index is there, what's known as the ex-FAB Dresden. It's an unusual case that it was a DPO looking to keep the DPO role. I think most DPOs on the call would happily forgo it if their organization took them out of it. But when the new regulation came in, the DPO was from one, I think it was IT now off the top of my head. He was within the IT department. So the organization said, under the previous regulation, you could do both jobs. Under this regulation, you clearly can't. There's a conflict of interest. And he took the organization to court to say that there wasn't a conflict of interest and he wanted to keep the DPO role. But the European Court of Justice, and the key takeaway from the whole case was, and this is a direct quote from the ruling, a DPO cannot be entrusted with tasks or duties which would result in him or her determining the objectives and methods of processing personal data on the part of the controller or its processor. Because if they're determined or a decision maker on the processing, then as a DPO, you can't independently review your decision. So there has to be that separation from a kind of a decision maker or a doer and the role of the DPO. The DPO can advise the decision maker, can be heavily involved in the decision, but he cannot make the decision or cannot write the policy or cannot do, and we look at that in a bit more detail later on. So that's that clear division which comes from that case in February of this year. So like that, so we kind of identified what you need to do and around training with us, but how can you achieve that? And policies, as we kind of previously said, policies and procedures are the key element to this. So like, what are policies and procedures? Okay, they must provide staff with clear direction to understand their roles and responsibilities. And we've spoken about your oversight committee and your data protection network for that vertical and horizontal alignment. Policies circulate and discussed to create buy-in. So include the policy drafting, include the stakeholder, include the end user. There's nothing worse than you getting if you're the end user getting a policy that this doesn't reflect my role, this doesn't reflect our organization, the language, it's clearly a templated policy that you're pushing. So if this is the organization's perception or importance that they're putting on data protection, I'm going to take a leaf out of their book and not enforcing that. Because like, if this is the time and effort you're putting into it, don't expect me to try and interpret this policy to implement it correctly, giving a clear policy that gives me my roles, responsibilities, and my procedures. And again, to achieve that, then it has to be improved by management to ensure sponsorship. The DPO can't be seen to be the one pushing policies. The board has to sign off on it. You report back to the board that policies are being implemented, not being implemented. But they sit with all other policies across the organization that data protection is on that same level as all of the other policies within the organization. Reviewed through document management. So again, yeah, whether it's 6 months or 12 months, depending on the size of the organization and the staff that's there, or changes in regulation, that you formal review procedures, but also then if a regulation change or an internal procedure changes, that you also review and change the policy. Because we said, if there's a breach or an incident and that's down to an error in policy or whatever, and rather than giving that individual voice to that individual person, at that stage then the policy is out of date. So all changes that have to be formally implemented in the policy and rolled out, so people know, do I go back to the advice I got in the email, or do I go to the policy? It should be in the policy. And then what you achieve from that is data protection by design and by default. And that's the purpose of policy and procedures, that data protection policies must promote data protection by design and default. So if there is a new process that's coming into place, that, okay, I need to do a DPO screening questionnaire, I need to inform the DPO if there's a breach, what I need to do. If the policy and procedures are that thorough, it promotes that full, open and transparent communication. And that comes then to question 24, which, how many requests for advice are there monthly? If there's none, it's alarming, because obviously there should be some. So again, your policies and procedures and training should be generating that thought with the end users. Oh God, the policy says this, maybe I need to check this, or maybe I need to get clarification. But if they're not reading the policies, they're not doing the training, those questions can't be generated in their head when they're looking at changing processes. So policy and procedures are the key to you achieving data protection by design and by default. And we all know data protection by design and by default, proactive, is a lot more efficient. That's the selling point with board, is it's far more efficient and assists your business goals far better than the DPO constantly being seen as that obstructive person that's saying no at the end. So I'm saying no because you didn't act. The policy clearly states at the start of this process, I should have been contacted. You're not contacting me and you want to go live next week. You're the one that hasn't gone by our policy and procedures. So the fault doesn't sit with the DPO, it sits with the end user. So looking at what we kind of say, yeah, we're discussing here, Tom, what we kind of determine a quick question, and this is extremely difficult, and yeah, we're backing over on it. So question 14 says, like, which of the following tasks are committed to the data protection officer? And broadly, like we said previously, like broadly, Article 39.1 has the advise. So these are the adjectives that are in 39. It's advise, inform, and monitor. Then question 15 asks, have additional tasks been committed to the data protection officer compared to those envisaged in GDPR? So those envisaged in GDPR is Article 39.1, advise, inform, and monitor. Article 38.6 then said assigned other tasks but no conflict of interest. So again, you can't be the doer, you can't be a decision maker on a process, and then if you're assigned additional task, you can't create that conflict of interest. So you can't be, if you're double jobbing and you're in IT, you can't design the process or design the security mechanisms and then put on your DPO hat and then analyze your decision. So question 15 gives you specific choices, and that's what's lifted there. And then myself and Tom and other people discuss, it's extremely difficult to say, do I, don't I? But what our key takeaway here is that you can't be doing them solely. So if you can't be a decision maker, but you can be heavily involved in assisting them reach their decision. So you're heavily involved in the process, but you're not, responsibility doesn't sit with you as the final decision maker. Same as developing. You can be involved in the development process, but you're not responsible. You're not the final decision maker. Same with drafting. So you can be involved in all of these, but responsibility for them can't sit with you, or you can't be decision maker, because then you can't take off that hat and put back on your DPO hat and just go through the same process again.
Well, certainly, Tom, you mentioned earlier about reading these carefully, and again, with my DPO hat on, I might, if I only read this quickly, I might tick all of these, because sometimes it does feel as if you were doing some of these tasks, but because every DPO wants to be helpful, they want to get on, they want their organization to be a success, but you have to read these two questions very carefully and make sure you answer it accurately and in line with the wording used, and in line with, as you've mentioned, the organization's own policies and procedures. And if you do tick extra stuff, make sure that it is actually in your role and what the possible consequences are if you do tick it. I think you've got to be very, this has got to be very closely read and signed off. I think, again, coming back to your point about many DPOs are put in the position of always being at the end of the process saying, can we do this or can we not? It's not for the DPO to be the decision maker, as you've mentioned. Advise, inform, monitor, and so be careful, I think, is the advice here.
Yeah, as you said, it comes back to those clear roles, like what is the DPO role and responsibility in this, or what is the information asset owner or the process owner, what's their role and responsibility? They're the ones that know the process. They're in the weeds. They know where the skeletons are buried as well. So they have to be fully transparent and accountable in providing all of the relevant information to the DPO. So a combined effort that they can be across all the risks and mitigate it and say whether it's compliant or not, and move ahead with it. And so that brings us on to the next one, is around that training and awareness. A lot of organizations maybe just have one kind of off-the-shelf training that they provide to the organization, but as the previous slide identified, there's certain stakeholders within your organization that is the decision maker on processing, that process high-risk data. And so you have to have a tailored training and awareness program. So at a base level, you have your all staff training. So training needs of all staff considered and use this information to complete the training program. So again, but that's all induction or at what stage you want that, but there's a base level that all staff achieve. And then you're looking at your induction and refresher training. So again, doing your induction training before they have access to data. You have to have that sign off. And then the refresher, because as you said, they're around amending policies, and even in the basic breach reporting format, you say, like, what were your mitigating measures prior? What your analysis, what did it turn out? Why did the breach happen? Human error, technical error. So what are the takeaways? And so now what are your new mitigating measures off the back of that incident or breach? So that refresher training, or that can also be led by changing the regulations or changing a process, or incident led, but you must have that refresher training there. And then specialized roles, do a training needs analysis. Okay, who has the keys to the safe majority? Where is the risk? Where is the highest risk? And make sure they get that specialized training for them to help them do their job. And again, the DPO is there to advise, monitor, and whatever. So again, monitor and reporting this. So run your monthly training report. Say HR are only at 20%, or HR are doing well, they're at 80%. But that reporting has to be at that form. You can't just focus on the negative, because then you're seen to be chasing people. So if you develop your training report, this report is going every month, whether people do it or not. If it's a positive report or a negative report, I'm impartial. The report's going. So again, people just know where the line is. But again, you're creating that buy-in at board level and getting that sign off. And then also we kind of looked, there are some questions between questions 10 and 22 that are kind of somewhat statistical. They look at kind of budget, part-time or full-time. These are questions 16, 17, 18, 21 to 22. 19 then is just a specific question: is there a deputy or not? And then question 20 just straight out calls it black and white: are resources sufficient? Yeah, whatever way the DPO wishes to answer that one. have one discussion internally and answer it a certain way, because I don't think any DPO on the call will say that they would deem that the resources are sufficient. And then moving on to the last section, which is section 4, which is the role and position of the data protection officer. So we see this kind of sits on more current issues and business as usual. So like we've looked at the organizational ones, 1 to 10, how to get that vertical horizontal alignment, policy and procedures, the big building blocks in place to support you to do these ones up. So from what's referenced in 25 to 34, like what you're doing on that day-to-day basis. So in looking at that, like you have your 3 pillars. You divide your program into your planning and your current. So we discussed the first, or your organizational alignment, policy and procedures, education and training, and they're kind of covering questions 1 to 24. Now you're looking at your more day-to-day firefighting, questions 25 to 34. So you've got your ROPA, and again the DPC here in Ireland just issued their guidance. They did a ROPA sweep last March and have now come out and issued guidance, and which is quite good actually in points. It's good guidance there if anybody is looking at doing work on the ROPA. Your subject rights, your breaches, data transfers agreements, DPOs and risk management, the day-to-day tasks that come up in front of the DPO. So looking specifically at what articles these questions relate to, and the call out article 38, which is the position of the DPO. And again, we've looked at this 38.1, DPO is involved properly and in a timely manner across all issues. So question 25 specifically calls this out: is the DPO across all issues? And 36 is are they across? 35 asks, and then 26 asks, are they required to be across them? So that's kind of asking the same question, kind of 2 separate ways. Is the DPO doing it because they think they want to do it, or is the DPO doing it because the organization has really specified the importance of the role? And then properly and timely, again, Tom, we discussed this, like what is that? Because you said you can't be the decision maker, but you can be heavily involved in it. So at a minimum, involved is aware. So at a minimum, you should be aware of all issues. If staff member in HR receives an incident, deals with the incident and resolves the incident, all of the actions is with them. But again, the DPO should be aware of that. But then they need to have that. So the minimum, you're talking awareness, and a maximum, you're heavily involved in the decision making and the designing. But you have to maintain that independence, and that comes back to question 15 and article 39.1, where there can't be that conflict of interest. Article 38.2 it provides that the data controller or the data processor, whichever organization you're working in, provides the resources necessary to carry out the tasks and access to the personal data and processing operations, and to maintain his or her expert knowledge.
Yeah. So now just to jump in there maybe and test this a little bit. So as you rightly said and highlighted there, like questions 25, 26 and 27, again, in some ways the correct answer should be all issues. It's all the time, in all processes and all of the time. That they're the 3 ones that would be the correct answer. But realistically, we all know as DPOs that sometimes people will come to you today and say, well, can you bless my DPIA? And you say, well, when are you going live? And say, oh, we're going live tomorrow. And yeah, so okay, so we've been involved, but only at the last minute. And that's not uncommon to hear that when DPOs get together to talk. So again, what's the best way to sort of think about answering this? And I suppose the other thing that came to mind is about evidencing. If you're ever, the GDPR is a lot about documentation and evidencing and accountability. Should the DPO and the organization actually do some background work here to say, well, this is why we answered all the time, or why we answered 75 to 99% of the time? What do you think?
Yeah, it is grey, like a lot of the other pieces within the questionnaire. But I suppose if you go back to the earlier slides where we were saying, like, the purpose of the EDP for this is to do a review of the roles and responsibility of the DPO, and are they given the access, and it specifically calls out 39.1 and that, are they given the resources and ability to do their role? So from an organizational point of view, I suppose the DPO should be kind of calling this out with the kind of that vertical alignment. Listen, I should be under a 39.1, be across all issues, be involved timely. So to achieve that, come back to the area of building blocks, I need policies, I need roles and responsibilities, I need the training. We're not there yet, but we can be compliant on paper now when we're sending in the questionnaire. But what we need to do now to back that up is have our cultural and our factual evidence. So there is that wriggle room there. So this is something that the DPO, this is kind of geared at and targeted, can use this. I've been trying to say, like, as in the DPO, like, I've been trying to tell you for the last 2 years that I need to do this. The DPC or the supervisor has now called this out. I need to answer this in a certain way, but this is how we now need to back it up. And again, that's reported, and that responsibility, because sometimes there's an informal conversation there with management and the DPO. Say, oh yeah, but listen, we okay, we do it, whatever, or we do it next time. And then I think it was actually off the top of my head now, I think it's Alfred's in the UK where they brought a case against their ex-DPO, said he wasn't doing his job. That's the extreme side of it. But the DPO has to have that independent reporting. Okay, I've now answered in this way. What we now need to do is sign off on these. And that's formal, and it's captured, and put the responsibility and the pressure on the board management. Don't be accepting that responsibility and pressure, because it's not the DPO role. And I know we're talking a lot of DPOs, that's the position they're in. There's a lot of unsaid rules and whatever, but everything needs to be said, everything needs to be documented, and the DPO needs to be positive and push it from that point of view. Now, I don't know if that answers your question, Tom, because I'm kind of quite long-winded.
Thanks, Nolik. Yeah, I'll let you move on, just conscious of time. So
they're specifically looking at question 27, calls out DPO, do you have access and do you have the resources? Question 28 is, again, you may have the access, you may have the policies, but is the DPO opinion followed? So again, this is, if we're going back, I suppose, to the area of question 25 around issues and required, this is really a chance for the DPO to reinforce it with management, and it's a chance for the DPC to kind of ask the same question in 2 or 3 different ways. So again, because you can have the policy, but if the opinion is not followed, then and then if it's not followed, question 29, if not, why, and is it documented? So again, question 25, 26, 27, 28, 29 are all really asking the one question: is data protection taken seriously? And do you have the factual evidence and the policies and the culture to show me that it is? And this is, again, so these are all, again, tasks that the DPO can call, okay, I can answer these all where the answer the DPC wants to get, but this is what I now need you to approve and sign off and give me the backing to do, for us to have the culture and not just talk the talk, that we're walking the walk. So then, and actually the last 4 questions are relatively straightforward. Question 30, 31, again, it's just straight up, is the DPO instructed or dismissed or penalized? This can only be reinforced by accurate reporting. And so that's come back to what we've had. If the board are asking the DPO to do something, the DPO should formally request them and ask the board to formally capture the response, not to say, well, you never really said it, or I didn't understand that's what you meant. It has to be very clear when they're making recommendations and stuff to the board level. And then question 32 and 33 around reporting, and we're kind of touching this across the whole of the kind of presentation. There's different reports, different depth, different breadth, and different purposes. You should have certain weekly reports, you should have certain monthly reports, and should have certain quarterly reports. And that's both informal and formal, whether it's telephone calls or emails or the formal reporting mechanism. And again, informal can work, but at times if informal isn't working, then you need to go formal. And these reports should be high level, but with the supporting information required. So you can broad level, traffic light system, the board or the management, here's the risks, here we are, these are on track, these are done, these aren't moving. But then if they ask, well, why is that not moving, that you have the supplementary evidence to back up that high level report. Because obviously board of management, they need a brief, precise report. They don't need to be overwhelmed with data protection principles and Article X, Y, and Z. And then finally, question 39, as part of the questions we sent to the DPC, we requested this specifically around, because they asked about the role of the DPC, but we've said, and I've come from yourself on that, ADPO get this frequently about setting up DPO networks or forums where like-minded DPOs from similar industries or similar jurisdictions can share their problems, because a lot of DPOs think they're in that dark hole by themselves, but once they kind of crawl out that hole or look outside the hole, they realize other DPOs in the same industry or the same is in the exact same place, and problem shared is a problem halved. So friends, DPC come back with positive feedback there, and that they're happy to engage further with ADPO to establish these DPO forums networks. And again, from some previous, we were happy to get involved. We kind of run a number of those informally ourselves within our own clients anyway that are in similar industries or similar networks. But we find them really beneficial, just for people to realize everybody else is in the same place. And I thought we were miles behind, but actually you're where everybody else is. Yeah. And just to promote that and again the forums and moving that way and kind of developing that relationship with ADPO. The next point there, yeah, we're happy to, as part of this, so this whole process, even though it is a questionnaire, it just focuses on a broad privacy program, and we do gap analysis, and that's what we do. We build it across the 10 business functions and try and, as we've kind of tried to do in this, is keep it business speak and not to be talking to board and management about data protection principles and obligations. Like, they want to know about policy and procedures, vertical, horizontal alignment, training, risk. So it's talking their language. So transferring that data protection terminology into their language so they understand the risks and recommendations that are going. So for our gap analysis, we try and identify the risks, build the recommendations of that, and then give key takeaway tasks. And then you can implement them over 6, 12, 18, 24 months. These are the tasks, these are the high risks. So this is why we're prioritizing these. And then down the line, we're doing these. So again, if anybody wants to reach out there, we're happy enough to engage with the first 10 that come in there and provide a free gap analysis to them, which will help them design this overall program that we've said to achieve that vertical horizontal alignment. And again, compliance doesn't happen overnight, and the DPC don't expect any organization to be fully compliant overnight, and you possibly can't be compliant. There's always new processes, there's always human error. But if you have that 12 or 24 month program, the DPC are happy to engage with you there and advise you on that. But if you just say we don't have the policy or we haven't done it, then you're in a whole different bargaining position with the DPC.
Okay. So thanks, Noel. That was really brilliant. You covered the whole space there. So I suppose that people have been asking questions that have been going along there. Is there any final questions that people would like to ask? And I think we could even take you off mute if you want to ask them.
Yeah, we're happy enough to follow up with some of those questions, Tom. We get them and dig a little bit deeper and come back and follow up with people if that's happening again, or if my email is slightly circulated my emails there. So again, yeah, people want to reach out, I'm happy enough to engage with them.
All right, I don't see any hands up or any more questions in the queue, so just conscious of time. So thanks, Noel, that was brilliant, and thanks for both for your offer about the gap analysis and also then for following up if anybody has any additional questions. As Noel mentioned a couple of times, the DPC certainly have been very engaged with us as we've prepared for this. So I think they'll be more than happy to engage with anybody who has questions if you're one of the lucky 100. So if you're not sure about certain questions or the way they're structured, because some wording is a bit odd. So that's it. So lastly, I just want to remind everyone that in a couple of weeks, the annual conference of the DPO will be on. And I invite you all to go to the registration page, and hopefully we'll see you in Croke Park. We have some excellent speakers, some excellent topics, and it's always worthwhile. So thanks very much, and we wish you all the best. I think that just to say, yeah, we will be making a copy of the recording and the slides and the questionnaire will be all made available shortly, hopefully maybe this afternoon if we can. So thanks everybody, and have a good afternoon. Thanks, Noel.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.